going inside the issues of our community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Whether you live in the city or the suburbs, whether you love them or you think they have become ineffective on most days and an embarrassment on some days, everyone agrees that no other unit of local government has more impact on the life of the region than Cincinnati City Council. Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. Over the past 14 months, a commission of 13 people appointed by Mayor Charlie Lucan has been working to study possible reforms of the elected leadership of the city of Cincinnati. The first set of issues they have examined involves alternatives to the current way that council is elected, all candidates running citywide using 9X voting method. One set of proposals calls for council members to be elected from geographically defined districts. Another proposal calls for a return to proportional representation, or PR, to elect council, a system that was used in Cincinnati from 1925 through 1955. A second area of study deals with whether or not the city should adopt a true strong mayor or executive mayor system rather than the city manager weak mayor system that we have worked under since 1925. To discuss the work of the commission, I am joined by its chair, Don Mooney. Mr. Mooney is a lawyer with the downtown firm of Ulmer and Byrne. He has been active in local politics since at least 1968. Don was still in high school when I was working on as a volunteer for the presidential primary election of Gene McCarthy, 68, right. And there you were.
I remember you
eager.
And your wife.
That's right. We weren't married yet.
And we both had more hair.
And, well, what it says is, if we can remember back that far, we've been in this way
That's
too long.
Right, exactly.
Let's talk about this. As I said in the setup, there are really two sections of this, and a lot of attention has gone to how to elect council. Given the fact that you're the chair of this committee, what would you say is the problem that with the way we elect council now as people would articulate it?
It's very expensive, first of all. It costs you probably $150,000, even if you're an incumbent, to keep your seat. If you want to break through and be a challenger and get on council, you probably have to raise $200,000 and devote almost all of your waking hours for the 6 months prior to an election. So it's hard for new blood, new ideas to get on council. And I think for some neighborhoods, not all of them, but some neighborhoods believe that when you have to elect candidates at large, it's easy for many council members to write off certain neighborhoods. I know the folks on the west side complain that it's rare when council members get elected from their part of the city, and they feel as a result their neighborhoods get neglected. So those are the problems I think that people see with the current system.
Now, a couple of years ago there was an effort to reform the cost of elections by setting limits and public funding. How would changing to some form of district system, and we'll talk about a couple of different proposals, how would that change what it costs?
Well, if you're running in a district, you probably don't have, maybe it's bad for Channel 12, you don't have to come to Channel 12 and buy TV advertising. You can really do more retail politics, go door to door, meet your neighbors, go to community meetings, focus on that neighborhood. And we're talking about 9 districts, which would be relatively compact. It's something that a lot of candidates could probably go door to door in, hit the church festivals, become well known because they're community activists, not spend money on TV, maybe do some mailing. You could probably run a campaign for $25,000 rather than $125,000.
Which is a lot, big difference.
Right.
Big difference.
Exactly.
Let's take a look at, there's actually sort of 2 of those district proposals floating around out there, and we've got the maps that are preliminary. This is the one, if there were 6 districts, 3 people would be elected at large, so there would still be 3 at-large positions. Then there's a second one, which is the one you were referring to. There it is, with 9 districts, and you can see the different color coding gives an indication of the size of those districts. And I might just say, and I didn't put this on the screen because they're hard to read all the numbers. These are balanced in terms of population and all of that kind of thing.
You have to do that to comply with federal law. You have to be balanced. You have to make sure that you're not packing one racial group or another into particular districts. So we had to pay attention to that. And in Cincinnati, we wanted to preserve neighborhood boundaries. That's critical because people really do identify with their neighborhood.
And the numbers, when you look at those maps, the numbers that are there are the neighborhood numbers, not the ward numbers.
Right, exactly. We focused on neighborhood census blocks. That's what you use to do this, and we had an expert do the maps for us. We looked at a number of maps and came down to these two as the most acceptable, we thought.
Where does the commission stand on these two and on the idea of districts versus 9X?
Well, by a close vote, we favored 9 districts, and that's what we're recommending to council. We're passing on to council the 6-district map because some people thought, well, maybe we could have the best of both worlds with 6 districts and 3 council members elected at large. The folks who like at large say, well, it's important to have at least some council members look at the overall interests of the city as a whole, and we understand that argument. We think the mayor can do that, quite frankly, better maybe than 9 council members, but the mixed system is used in many cities. Many cities our size have a system where some folks are elected by districts, others are elected at large to council.
When you're saying a close vote recommended the 9 districts, does that mean there's not a great deal of enthusiasm for this?
Well, I think it reflects kind of the overall views of the city. We did some polling on this subject, and we found that although people are very uncomfortable with the direction of the city, they're discouraged by how things are going, issues of crime and racial conflict, and issues, a sense that the city isn't really going in a particularly good direction. There wasn't clear consensus among the public that we asked, well, do you favor districts or at large? It was really split evenly. And I think we decided, well, let's exercise some leadership. But once again, it was a close vote because some people do like the system of choosing 9 council members.
Back when you began your work, one of the other proposals that's out there for election is always proportional representation.
Right.
Any enthusiasm for that at all?
You know, the hardest, everybody likes the general concept, well, you can rank your votes. You get 9 votes, but you can decide who your first place vote is. When you start talking about how you count those votes, and I can't explain it, there's a very complicated mathematical process. They used to do it manually, and it took 3 days. Now, in theory, you can do it with a computer. But I think once you get to the point of explaining that to folks, it's not helpful and it's confusing. The other problem is this with PR. The argument for PR back in the 1950s and maybe the 1960s was that it assured representation on council of various racial groupings. And that was a problem in the 1950s when we had a significant minority, but there was racial block voting, and it was hard to get white voters to vote for black candidates. Now I think the city's changed. We have a racially almost equally divided electorate in Cincinnati now. I think you can see by the racial voting patterns that black candidates will get votes from white voters and vice versa. And I don't see that the need for PR that was there in the early part of the last century or the middle of the last century is there now.
Okay. Let's move on to the second part of this work that you've been doing, and that is the nature of the office of mayor.
Right.
Now, a lot of people would say, because of the reforms that we went through 4 years ago, oh, gee, we went to a strong mayor system.
Right.
What's different between the system now and the system you're proposing?
I think what happened 4 years ago, everybody was so anxious to have a directly elected mayor and to get away from the elbowing on council in the system we had previously, where the person who was able to get the most votes in the council race automatically became mayor, that we focus more on the election process and not what the mayor would or would not be allowed to do. So, we engaged an expert, we looked at cities around the country, and what we found is what we suspected from our own experience over these last few years, which is that when you empower a mayor, but you still allow council to meddle in the management, the day-to-day management of the city, you have a city administration that isn't very efficient and finds a lot of difficulty in picking a direction and then moving that way. The problem with the current charter is, although we do directly elect our mayor, and the system of election I think works pretty well, we have the mayor then recommend to council a city manager. The city manager really is in the day-to-day person in charge of the city. He or she will pick the police chief, all the other department heads, be responsible for all the daily stuff that you see on the streets that makes a city run. but the manager doesn't report to the mayor. The manager under the current system reports both to council and the mayor, and as a result, the mayor doesn't have the ability, I think, to really lead the city, to pick a direction, to choose the team, and then be accountable to the voters for what happens.
Given what you're proposing, how would that change?
What we would change is we would no longer have a council manager form of government, and this is the big change that we're recommending, I think. We'd still have a council, whether it's by districts or at large, of 9 persons, but the council essentially would be like Congress or the State House.
They'd be legislators.
They'd be legislators. There'd be separation of powers. They would pass the budget. They would pass laws or repeal them. They'd probably have to approve contracts of a significant level. But the mayor would have the executive power with the assistance of what we are calling a chief administrative officer, who would be a professional with the same type of professional qualifications that our managers have had. But that CAO would report to the mayor and be accountable to the mayor. The mayor would pick the CAO, the mayor would work with him or her, the mayor could remove him or her if he wasn't happy with how things were going.
And is that what exists in places like Chicago or New York?
Well, it's similar to that. I mean, in Chicago or New York, you have the pure, strong mayor, where the mayor basically is the boss and runs the city, picks all those administrators, and if he wants a professional administrator, he'll pick one. This is sort of strong mayor light to some extent. Okay. I think people in Cincinnati like the idea of a sort of an adult supervision, we were jokingly referring to it, knowing that there's a professional in charge of the day-to-day administration, but also knowing that the mayor really is the one they pick, they elect that person, he's accountable, or she, and they can remove him or her if things aren't going well.
Given that, if you put that much responsibility, authority with the mayor, and you move council out of meddling with a city manager, does that change? Do we need a no matter how you elect them, do you need city council people who are full-time and paid as if they're full-time?
That's a good question. I mean, right now, our council members, and I don't know that we ever intended to do this, but they have become full-time. You know, it used to be council members were like sitting on a board of directors of a corporation. They got paid a modest amount, and in many cities they still do.
In our memory, by the way.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I mean, it's not that long ago.
You got $15,000. At some point we pegged it to the county commissioner's salaries, and it's 2/3 of a county commissioner's salaries, and that avoided all those nasty little fights every couple of years about, well, should we give ourselves a raise? They used to have to set their own salary. Now they're sort of pegged to this state-set salary, and they get paid $57,000 a year. Our view was, and compared to other councils in other cities, I think as an example, in cities over 250,000 population, the average salary for council members is in the $30,000 to $40,000 range if you have a strong mayor. Our thought was if we go to districts, maybe that's a good time also to cut back council salaries because they won't be running citywide. They won't have to run around to meetings all over the city on a weekly basis. And we don't think they should be involved in the day-to-day sort of micromanagement of the administration. It's funny, we had some of our more senior members of the community, people like Jack Gilligan, Marion Spencer, former Mayor Ruhlman, Bobby Stern, who came in and talked about sort of the old days when they didn't have a big staff, they didn't have a big salary, but you know, things seemed to get done. And part of that was, yeah, exactly. Part of that was, you know, the council members weren't in there asking for reports every day from all the administrators.
I'm basically out of time, but I want to clean up 2 things. One, what's the level of support in your commission for this change for the mayor?
It was very strong. There are only 3 folks out of the 13 who voted against it who are from the Charter Party, and I think traditionally they've always been in favor of sort of the pure council manager form of government.
And lastly, how would any of these changes get adopted? Can council do it? Will council just put it on the...
It has to be approved by the public in a vote. Council has the opportunity by 2/3 vote of council to put it on the ballot if they want to, and we're hoping that at least they'll give it a shot. They appointed us to do this work, and we hope that they'd have enough confidence to put it on the ballot, but if they don't, we can get signatures.
And when will your formal report be made?
Next week.
Okay, very good.
Thank you, Dan.
Don, thank you.
Sure.
Stay tuned. After the break, the ongoing issue of funding Ohio schools in light of the election results on Tuesday night.
Ohio has one of the worst school funding formulas in the country. I was a principal over in Kentucky for a few years, and their funding is not perfect, but it's a lot closer than it is over here. I mean, the state considers our district a rich district because we have a lot of land. But unfortunately, we don't have a lot of people on that land.
What kind of revenue source can we come up with that's stable and grows and is predictable in order to provide that? And then how do you distribute that money equitably?
Welcome back. On Tuesday, 19 school districts in Southwest Ohio asked voters to pay more to support education. In 8 of those districts, including Batavia, Madeira, Mason, St. Bernard, Elmwood Place, and West Clermont, voters supported the levies and bond issues. But in 11 districts, including Clermont, Northeastern, Reading, Winton, Woods, and Lakota, the voters turned down funding requests. I am joined this morning by superintendents from 2 school districts that failed to get their levies passed. Camille Nasbe became the superintendent of Winton Woods School in northern Hamilton County 2 years ago. On Tuesday, the district proposed an $8.95 million operating levy, which was mostly a renewal but contained a slight increase. It lost 56 to 44%. Charles Shreve has been the superintendent of Clermont Northeastern Schools since 1993. They asked voters to approve an operating levy for an additional $4.9 million. The issue lost 70 to 30%. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Looking at the results from Tuesday, do you think there was anything you could have done during the presentation to the voters, the campaign, that would have changed people's minds? Was it a communications problem, in other words?
I really don't think that was the case. I feel like we did an excellent job of communicating and making our case. We had 2 community forums. We had newspaper articles. Both local newspapers endorsed us. Both councils endorsed us. We had literature drops the weekend before. So I think there was a plethora of information.
So it wasn't an informational problem. It was something more deep-seated.
Personally, I don't feel that way.
How about in your situation?
Well, our situation was very similar to Winton Woods in the sense that certainly tried to get word out to our constituents as to what the issues were and held community forums and open house with the superintendent and treasurer, did many of the typical campaign activities.
And did people show up for those? Do people respond to those?
We had some response to those, Dan, but I think that perhaps sometimes the value of those really is that folks know that you are available, whether they choose to avail themselves of it or not. At least it shows that we're trying to be open and accessible.
So do you feel like there is a more deep-seated issue here than just a communications campaign issue, just as Camille does?
Certainly.
What is that issue?
People bring lots of things with them when they go in the voting booth. Their own personal economic situation might be a paramount of those. And those are sorts of things that are realities when people step into that booth, and all we can do is present our case as best we can, and folks have to make their own decisions.
How about from your perspective? These personal issues are obviously there. Do you think there's just sort of a sense, especially in a place like Hamilton County? Winton Woods is in Hamilton County. For people who may not know, it's Green Hills and Forest Park.
That's correct. That's the
You were
old
talking
name.
about the 2 councils. So Green Hills and Forest Park. Being in Hamilton County, do you think there's a residual just sense around the Bengals tax levy and all of that kind of stuff that just carries over and is affecting you?
Well, I think economics probably did play a part in it. And in our particular case, we have a lovely district, Winton Woods. So we have a lot of woods, a lot of churches, very little business to support our public schools. And so the burden does fall on the local taxpayer. And we're very cognizant of that and respectful of that.
On the residential taxpayer, not...
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's something that a lot of people, we hear so much about Cincinnati public schools and the problems they have. But Cincinnati public schools has a huge office complex to draw on, industrial complex, a lot of very valuable property other than residential to pay for. The suburban school districts have little of that. Is that the same in yours?
Yes, but where we would be considered more suburban/rural, but the situation remains the same. There's really very little commercial tax base in our school district.
Now, given all of that, as a backdrop, we all know that over the last 5-6 years, there's been an ongoing effort through the DeRolf effort, the case that we've done many shows about. What can be done? I mean, realistically, you're superintendents. What can be done about this situation? And is it something that only can be done in Columbus? Are local school districts just boxed in?
Well, one of the things this levy sort of pointed out to me was that, and I think my colleague would probably agree, we need to do a better job as superintendents, as educators, getting the word out in simple terms to the average citizen. Other than that, I'm not quite sure what we can do. It really is a problem. Education's a state responsibility. It's outlined that way in the state constitution, and yet they give us less than half of the money that we need to support our schools. And the fact that you have to go back to the voters every 3 to 5 years typically is problematic. We were talking in the room earlier about we're being forced to cut programs periodically, so there's an instability there in a child's education, and that's just not a good thing.
You know, this whole question of cutting programs, which I suspect because your levies failed, you're both facing some of that right now. Lots of people on the outside, particularly people who don't have children in the schools, I hear it all the time, no matter what the school district is, oh, they waste money. There's fat there. There's too many nice things there that they don't really need. What's your response to that?
I wouldn't deny that in any organization there's some level of what you might call waste or fat. I think that the larger the organization, probably the greater percentage would be present. I think oftentimes when you look at a local school district that is governed by 5 to 7 of your neighbors that are elected, that probably that percentage is fairly low in a school district as compared to, say, a county government or state government or the federal government.
You know, one of the things that is a phenomenon here, it started in Hamilton County, but it's moving to other places, is sort of a no tax anytime. The Coast organization, Citizens Against Taxes and Spending, I forget it. Anyway, they were active in the Lakota district on this election. Sort of this, you know, knee-jerk, absolutely against any increase in taxes. What do you say to a group like that?
Well, I would invite them into our schools and see what we're doing, see how we are using our taxpayer dollars. I think they'd be surprised.
Okay.
No, I think that you know, taxes are, I guess, considered by most folks as a necessary evil, and there's always some honest difference of opinion as to you know, what's the proper amount to be taxed and the proper expenditure of those funds. And it certainly all is a political process, and defining politics as who gets what when. You know, that whole issue of trying to determine how scarce resources are distributed.
If more of the burden got shifted away from the local property tax to the state tax, people would still have to pay taxes. It would just go to different. What would be the advantage of that?
Well, there'd be more equity between school districts, for one thing, because you wouldn't be relying on your local property tax base.
And concretely, what would that mean in Winton Woods?
Well, I don't know. It would depend upon the way they distributed the funds. But for example, we live right next door to a district that has Tri-County Mall, General Electric, and so forth. So I think there'd be a whole lot more equity.
And so we're talking about the Princeton School District there, right? And with a tremendous tax base.
Exactly, and that's all over Ohio. You know, there's just such a varying degree of commercial property and so forth.
We got less than a minute left. Do you have any hope that there is going to be a change on the state level, especially since the DeRolf decision has kind of run dead?
It's an ongoing issue. I know that it comes in fits and starts. Other states have tackled it with various amounts of success. So being a dedicated public educator, I'm always hopeful that that the future will hold better things for us.
And I'm almost out of time, but are you in constant communication with your state legislators about this?
Yes, we are.
I had a legislative breakfast earlier in the year.
Okay, Very good. Obviously, we're going to keep following this. Thank you for being here this morning, and good luck with the decisions you have to make in the next few months.
Thank you.
So, thank you for making Local 12 Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week to meet the women and the men shaping our community for the future. Have a good week.